The warehouse smelled like rust and betrayal. Santiago, the snake, Vargas stood in the center of the killing floor, checking his Rolex with theatrical precision. Around him, 12 of his best Vipers lounged against crates, AR-15s gleaming under the harsh industrial lights. Above, hidden in the rafters like patient spiders, 6 more men adjusted their scopes, aiming at the empty conference table below. "How much longer?" asked Captain Hayes, the corrupt police officer who'd supplied the weapons. His badge caught the light as he shifted nervously. Santiago smiled, showing too many teeth. "The Iron Monarchs are punctual men, Captain. They'll be here. And when they walk through that door." He made a gun with his fingers, pointed it at the empty chairs, and clicked his tongue. "History. You're sure Kane will bring his whole leadership?" "Of course. It's a peace summit." Santiago laughed, the sound echoing off concrete walls. "The fool actually believes in honor among thieves. He'll bring his VP, his road captain, his sergeant-at-arms, every officer in his pathetic little club. 50 years of the Iron Monarchs, ended in 50 seconds. Hayes swallowed hard. "And my cut? 20% of everything they control. The docks, the protection contracts, Santiago paused, tilting his head. "Do you hear that?" The distant rumble of Harley engines, growing louder. Santiago's smile widened into something predatory. "Gentlemen, our guests have arrived. Remember, let them sit down first. I want to see the hope die in their eyes before we—" But the engines stopped. Not gradually, not the sound of bikes parking. They just stopped. Santiago frowned, walking toward the warehouse's main entrance. Through the grimy windows, he could see nothing but darkness and the empty lot beyond. "Where are they?" Hayes whispered. High above in the ventilation system, invisible in the shadows, a small figure pressed her face against a grate. Raven had seen enough. She slithered backward through the duct, moving with the silence of smoke, and dropped into the alley behind the warehouse. She had to find Dom. She had to warn him. Because 3 years ago, Dominic Kane had done something no one else in this city had ever done. He'd treated her like a human being. 20 minutes earlier, Dom Kane sat astride his fat boy, the engine purring between his thighs like a caged lion. Behind him, stretched across the abandoned lot of the old meatpacking district, 50 Harley-Davidsons formed a perfect V formation. The Iron Monarch's full leadership, plus their most trusted brothers. This was it. The end of a 10-year war. Vincent "Vinny" Romano, the club's vice president, pulled up alongside Dom. At 40, Vinny still fought like he was 20, but tonight his scarred knuckles gripped the handlebars with unusual tension. "You sure about this, Press?" Vinny's voice barely carried over the idling engines. Dom didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the warehouse ahead, a hulking monument to the city's industrial past. Now just another corpse in a graveyard of broken dreams. The Vipers had chosen the location. Neutral ground, they'd said. No advantages for either side. "The war is costing us, Vinny. We've lost 12 brothers in 2 years. The cops are breathing down our necks. The suppliers won't work with us while we're fighting the Vipers." Dom's jaw tightened. Santiago called for peace. Maybe he's tired too. Santiago is a snake. It's in his damn name. Maybe. But what's the alternative? We fight until there's nobody left. Vinny spat on the ground. "I'd rather go down swinging than walk into." "Excuse me." The voice was so small, so unexpected, that both men nearly reached for their guns. A figure emerged from behind a dumpster. Small, hooded, moving with an odd combination of caution and urgency. In the sodium light of the street lamps, Dom could make out a girl, maybe 11, maybe younger, drowning in a hoodie that hung past her knees. Raven. Dom killed his engine. The girl called Raven was a fixture in the neighborhood, as permanent and invisible as graffiti. She lived in the spaces between spaces, ventilation ducts, abandoned cars, the crawl spaces beneath condemned buildings. Dom had first encountered her 2 years ago when he'd stopped a drunk from kicking her dog, a 3-legged mutt she called Tripod. Since then, she'd been a ghost at the edge of his world. Sometimes he'd see her watching from fire escapes. Other times, she'd leave things, a beer bottle filled with wildflowers on his bike seat, a crayon drawing of a motorcycle stuck to the clubhouse door. But she'd never spoken. Not once. The streets said she was mute, traumatized by something that had stolen her voice along with her family. Kid, this isn't a good time, Vinny growled. We got business. Raven ignored him. She walked straight to Dom and grabbed his boot with fingers that trembled despite their grip. When she looked up, Dom saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. Terror. Pure, absolute terror. And then she spoke. Her voice sounded like it was scraping its way out of a grave, rough from years of disuse, but the words were crystal clear. They are waiting for you. The world seemed to tilt. Behind Dom, engines sputtered and died as brothers noticed something was happening. Vinny's hand moved to his concealed Glock. Dom dismounted slowly, kneeling so he was eye level with the girl. Raven, you can talk. Not at the table, she continued, her voice gaining strength, urgency bleeding into every syllable. In the rafters, with rifles. They're going to kill all of you. Jesus Christ, Vinny muttered. The kids finally lost it. Press, we need to. How do you know? Dom's voice was gentle but firm, his eyes never leaving Raven's face. I live there, in the vents. I was sleeping when they came. She was shaking now, words tumbling out like water from a broken dam. The Vipers brought guns. Long ones, with the circle glass on top. And a policeman. They opened blue boxes with CPD evidence written on them. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. Dom knew those boxes. The entire club knew those boxes. Last month, the cops had seized a shipment meant for the Monarchs. 20 AR-15s with military-grade scopes, intercepted at the docks. The DA had made a big show of it, promised they'd be destroyed. But if Raven was describing them accurately. Blue boxes, Dom repeated slowly. CPD evidence. You're sure? Raven nodded frantically. I saw through the metal squares. The policeman. He has yellow hair and a metal star on his shirt. He gave them to the Vipers. They're in the high places, pointing the guns at the chairs. The Snake Man said. She paused, searching for the words. He said 50 years ended in 50 seconds. Vinny had gone pale. Press. Dom stood, his mind racing through calculations. If this was true, if Santiago had turned a peace summit into an ambush, with police weapons, with Captain Hayes' cooperation, then they were 30 seconds away from extinction. But if it wasn't true, if this was just the paranoid delusion of a traumatized child, then walking away now would be an unforgivable insult. Santiago would have proof that Dom was a coward, that the Monarchs were weak. The war would intensify. Every brother in the club was watching him now. 50 pairs of eyes, waiting for the decision that would define their future, or end it. Dom looked down at Raven. She was still gripping his boot, her thin body tense as a wire, her eyes pleading with him to believe her. And he thought about 2 years ago. The drunk. The dog. The way this tiny girl had thrown herself between tripod and a steel-toed boot without hesitation, willing to take the kick herself. She'd been brave then. Why would she lie now? Cut the engines, Dom said quietly. All of them. Right now. Boss. Vinny's voice cracked with disbelief. You heard me. Dom's voice hardened into the command tone that had kept the club alive through a decade of war. Kill every engine. We don't ride in. We walk. Confusion rippled through the formation, but discipline held. One by one, the Harleys fell silent. The sudden quiet was deafening. 50 men, 50 motorcycles, and the only sound was the distant wail of a police siren blocks away. Dom turned to his sergeant-at-arms, a scarred bear of a man called Brick. Get Carlos and the boys with the rifles. Tell them to circle around to the north side, find high ground. I want eyes on those rafters. On it, President. Vinny, take 10 men, seal off the back exits. Nobody leaves that building without my permission. You really think? I think this girl just saved our lives. Dom's hand settled on Raven's shoulder, gentle despite the calluses and old scars. And I think Santiago is about to learn what happens when you try to kill the Iron Monarchs. The Monarchs moved like shadows, pushing their bikes into the darkness behind the neighboring warehouses. Dom had fought in enough wars, both in the Marines and on these streets, to know the difference between paranoia and tactical awareness. This was the latter. Raven led them through a maze of alleys, her small frame slipping through gaps in chain-link fences that grown men had to climb. Tripod trotted beside her, the three-legged dog somehow, keeping pace despite his disability. She could be working for them, Vinny muttered, close enough that only Dom could hear. Bait. Lead us into a different trap. Then why warn us about the ambush? I don't know. President, I don't know what game Santiago is playing. But this. Vinny gestured at the girl ahead of them. This is too convenient. She's never said a word in 3 years, and suddenly tonight, right before the biggest meet in club history, she becomes a prophet. Dom didn't respond. He was watching Raven move through the urban decay, noting the way she navigated without hesitation, without a single wrong turn. This wasn't a child being led. This was someone who knew every brick, every shadow, every secret passage in this part of the city. Someone who truly lived in the walls. They reached a service entrance behind the Target warehouse. Raven stopped, pressing herself against the wall, and pointed upward. There, she whispered. The vent. I can show you. The vent in question was 15 feet up, covered by a rusted grate. To anyone else, it would be inaccessible. But Raven moved to a dumpster, then to a series of old pipes that formed an improvised ladder. She climbed with the unconscious grace of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Dom followed, ignoring Vinny's protests. The metal groaned under his 200-pound frame, but held. At the top, Raven had already pried the grate open. The screws had been removed long ago, he noticed. Inside, the ventilation system opened into a horizontal shaft barely wide enough for Dom's shoulders. Raven slipped in like smoke. Dom had to crawl, every movement producing small sounds that made him wince. But Raven's hiding place was brilliant. The shaft connected to a larger vertical duct that ran the height of the building, with grates opening into every floor. She led him to one particular grate, about 40 feet above the main warehouse floor. Through the metal slats, Dom could see everything. The scene below made his blood freeze. Santiago stood near the conference table, checking his watch. But that wasn't what caught Dom's attention. It was the men in the rafters, 6 of them, positioned in 3 pairs along the metal catwalks. Each held an AR-15 with a precision scope, and each rifle was aimed at the empty chairs around the table. Near Santiago, wearing his police uniform like a costume, Captain Malcolm Hayes shifted nervously. The same Captain Hayes who'd arrested 3 monarchs last year on bogus charges. The same Captain Hayes who'd held that press conference about seizing dangerous weapons. Weapons that were now pointed at the space where Dom and his officers would have been sitting. See? Raven's whisper was barely audible. The blue boxes. And there they were, stacked against the wall, still bearing the CPD evidence stamps. Empty now, their contents distributed among the assassins. Dom felt a cold rage settle into his bones. Not the hot, explosive anger that led to mistakes. This was the calculated fury of a man who'd just watched someone try to murder his family. He turned to Raven. In the dim light filtering through the grate, her eyes were wide, waiting for his judgment. You've been living here? In these vents? A small nod. How long? 3 years. Since Mama didn't come home. 3 years. This child had survived 3 years in the skeleton of the city, invisible and alone. And the first time she broke her silence was to save the life of a biker who'd once defended her dog. What's your real name, kid? Lucia. But everyone called me Raven because. She touched her hood. I wear black. And I watch. Well, Lucia Raven, you just saved 50 lives. Dom reached into his jacket and pulled out a small walkie-talkie, one of the encrypted units the club used. He pressed it into her hands. I need you to be my eyes. Can you do that? Watch them, tell me if they move. I can do that. Good. When this is over, you and I are going to have a serious talk about where you're living. He ruffled her hair, an impulsive gesture that surprised him even as he did it. But right now, I've got to go teach some snakes about honor. Dom descended the vent system with new purpose. At ground level, his officers had gathered in a tight circle, their faces reflecting the same question. What now? It's real, Dom announced. Everything the girl said. 6 shooters in the rafters with our stolen ARs. Santiago and Captain Hayes are partners in this. The silence that followed was funeral deep. Then Vinny spoke, his voice carrying a razor's edge. So we burn them all. Not yet. Dom pulled out his phone, opening the tactical map he'd created of the area weeks ago, standard preparation for any meet. We do this smart. Carlos, status. The walkie crackled. In position, President got visual on the north side catwalks. Confirming 6 tangos with long guns. ROE is weapons free, but wait for my signal. I want this clean. Copy that. Dom turned to his assembled brothers. In the darkness, their faces were hard plains of shadow and determination. These men had followed him through gang wars, police raids, and FBI investigations. They'd bleed for him, die for him. Tonight, they wouldn't have to do either. Here's how this goes, Dom said. Vinny, take Squad 1, seal the south exits. Miguel, you've got Squad 2 on the east. Nobody, and I mean nobody, leaves this building without my permission. What about the front entrance? Asked Brick. That's mine. Dom smiled, but there was no humor in it. I'm going to walk in through the front door. Just me. Press, that's suicide. It's chess. Dom cut off the objection. Santiago expects us to come in through the front as a group. When I walk in alone, it'll throw him off balance. He'll think we're stalling, that we suspect something. While he's focused on me, you position everyone else. And if they just shoot you the second you walk in? They won't. Santiago wants to gloat. He's been planning this too long to not make a speech first. Dom checked his Glock, loaded, safety off, one in the chamber. Besides, I've got an insurance policy. He activated the walkie. Raven, you there? I'm here. Her small voice carried a surprising steadiness. I need you to do something scary. Can you be brave? I'm always brave. Dom smiled despite everything. I need you to record what you see and hear. Your phone has a camera, right? No phone. Brick, give her yours. The sergeant-at-arms hesitated only a moment before producing a smartphone. How are we getting it to her? Raven, can you come back down? Yes. 2 minutes. While they waited, Dom outlined the rest of the plan. It was simple, which meant it was good. Santiago had created a kill box designed for one scenario, the monarchs walking in unsuspecting through the main entrance. But kill boxes worked both ways. Once you knew the geometry, you could invert it. Turn the trap into a cage. Raven appeared, silent as a ghost. Brick showed her how to use the phone's camera, how to zoom, how to ensure the audio was recording. Film everything, Dom instructed. What they say, what they do. Can you do that? Raven nodded, already climbing back toward her vent with the phone clutched to her chest. Positions, everyone. You've got 5 minutes. Dom straightened his leather vest, the Iron Monarch's patch proud across his back. Let's show these snakes what happens when you hunt lions. Dom walked through the front entrance alone. The warehouse interior was exactly as Raven had described. Concrete floors, metal rafters, and the smell of old machine oil. The conference table sat in the center, chairs arranged in a mockery of negotiation. And standing beside it, Santiago the snake. Vargas looked genuinely surprised. Dominic, you're late. And Santiago's eyes swept the empty space behind Dom. Alone? My boys are parking the bikes. Wanted to check the venue first. Dom walked further in, his boots echoing off concrete. He kept his hands visible, non-threatening, even as his eyes cataloged everything. 6 shooters in the rafters, exactly where Raven said. 4 more Vipers on the ground floor, trying to look casual but positioned to block retreat. And Captain Hayes, standing in the shadows like guilt personified. Safety precaution, Santiago said smoothly. I'm sure you understand. Of course. Mind if I look around? Be my guest. Dom walked a slow circle around the table, appearing to examine the space while actually positioning himself. The kill box was designed with clear firing lanes to the chairs. But there were blind spots, support columns, stacked crates, the angle of the rafters themselves. Above, invisible in the darkness, Raven would be recording everything. Nice setup, Dom commented. Neutral ground, like we agreed. I'm a man of my word. Are you? Dom stopped walking, turned to face Santiago directly. Because I heard an interesting rumor tonight. Santiago's smile didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened. Oh, someone told me you weren't planning a peace summit. They said you were planning something else. Someone. Santiago's voice carried amusement. And who would that be? A little bird. The tension ratcheted tighter. Captain Hayes shifted uncomfortably, his hand drifting toward his service weapon. In the rafters, Dom imagined he could feel the crosshairs settling on his chest. The thing about little birds, Santiago said slowly, is that they sometimes lie. Or, Dom countered, they tell the truth, and the snakes are the liars. Santiago's mask slipped. For just a second, his smile became something uglier, more honest. You're stalling, Dominic. Where are your men? Closer than you think. Dom raised his hand. A simple gesture, palm open to the ceiling. The warehouse exploded with motion. The north wall blew inward as Carlos and his team drove a stolen truck through the corrugated metal. At the same moment, the south and east doors crashed open, admitting waves of iron monarchs with weapons drawn. Santiago lunged for his gun, but Dom was faster. He'd been expecting this, had been coiled and ready. His Glock cleared leather in a fraction of a second, the barrel settling on Santiago's forehead with absolute precision. Don't. The word carried enough ice to freeze blood. Above, the 6 snipers tried to reposition, but Carlos's team already had them in their sights. The standoff was instant and total, every man in the warehouse suddenly facing the reality that the next trigger pull would be their last. Everybody freeze. Captain Hayes shouted, his police training overriding his criminal instincts. I'm a police officer. Stand down. You're a traitor, Dom called out, not taking his eyes off Santiago. And I've got evidence to prove it. You've got nothing. I've got video of you supplying weapons for an assassination. Video of you and Santiago planning to murder 50 men. Video. Dom smiled without humor. Of everything. Hayes went white. Impossible, Santiago hissed. Nobody could. The walls have eyes, Dom interrupted. And voices. And cameras. He pulled out his own walkie-talkie, pressed the button. Raven, you still recording? Yes. Her small voice echoed through the warehouse with surreal clarity. Santiago's face drained of color as understanding hit. The vents. You put someone in the goddamn vents. I didn't put anyone anywhere. She was already there. Living there. Watching. Dom's voice hardened. And when you idiots held your little planning session, she heard every word. A child? You're bluffing. 50 years ended in 50 seconds, Dom quoted. Those were your exact words, Santiago. Want me to play the recording? The silence was absolute. Captain Hayes broke first. This is entrapment. You can't. I can send this to the FBI, the state police, every news station in the city. Dom finally lowered his gun, but his eyes promised violence. Or you can make this easy. What do you want? Hayes' voice cracked. Your badge. Your confession. Your cooperation in taking down every dirty cop in your network. Dom turned to Santiago. And you. You're done. The Vipers are finished. Your territory, your connections, your legacy. All of it comes to the monarchs. You sign it over, tonight, or I release this video and let the world see what kind of coward you really are. Santiago's hands shook with rage. You think you've won? You think. I know I've won. The only question is whether you walk out of here in handcuffs or a body bag. What happened next would be talked about in the streets for years. Santiago, faced with the reality of his failure, made one last desperate play. He grabbed for Captain Hayes' service weapon, clearly intending to shoot Dom, and hoped the chaos provided an escape. He was too slow. Vinny, positioned behind a support column, put 2 rounds into Santiago's shoulder before the snake could clear leather. Santiago went down screaming, his blood painting the concrete floor in abstract patterns. The Vipers froze. Their leader was down, bleeding, defeated. The snipers in the rafters carefully, very carefully, placed their weapons on the catwalks and raised their hands. It was over. Dom walked to where Santiago lay clutching his shoulder, his face twisted in pain and disbelief. You want to know the funny part? Dom crouched beside the fallen gang leader. I actually came here tonight hoping for peace. I was tired of the war, tired of losing brothers. I would have signed a treaty, divided the territory fairly, ended this. Then you're a fool, Santiago gasped. No, you're the fool. Because you were so focused on being clever, on setting the perfect trap, that you forgot the most important rule of war. Dom stood, looking down at the broken man with something close to pity. Always check the walls for watchers. Captain Hayes was already handcuffed, Brick reading him his rights with gleeful sarcasm. The corrupt officer wasn't resisting. The video evidence had destroyed him more thoroughly than any bullet could. The Vipers officers, those who hadn't been involved in the assassination plot, were segregated to one side of the warehouse. Dom approached them, his expression carefully neutral. Here's the deal, he announced. Your leader tried to commit mass murder. He involved dirty cops. He used police weapons. That makes this bigger than gang business. This is federal crime territory. So you've got a choice. He gestured to Santiago, now being loaded onto a stretcher by monarchs trained in field medicine. You can go down with him, face the conspiracy charges, spend 20 years in federal prison. Or, Dom paused. You can recognize new leadership. The Vipers merge with the monarchs, peacefully, under my protection. Anyone with a problem can leave town. Tonight. One of the Vipers, a scarred veteran called Cisco, stepped forward. And if we agree, we just become monarchs. You keep your patches. You keep your bikes. You keep your honor. Dom's voice carried absolute conviction. But you answer to me. And there's one rule. One absolute, unbreakable rule. He looked each Viper in the eye. No more war. No more civilian casualties. We run this city smart, clean, and honorable. Anyone who can't accept that. He pointed to the door. There's the exit. Cisco looked at his brothers, then back at Dom. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand. The snake was always a coward. Maybe it's time we followed a lion instead. Dom shook the offered hand, sealing the merger that would reshape the city's criminal landscape. But his mind was elsewhere. On a little girl in the rafters, who'd been braver than anyone. It took 20 minutes to secure the scene. Santiago and Captain Hayes were transported to a private facility, the kind where people went to disappear from official records before reappearing in FBI custody. The remaining Vipers were organized, processed, their weapons cataloged. But Dom's attention was elsewhere. He stood beneath the ventilation grate, looking up into darkness. Raven, you can come down now. It's safe. No response. Kid? Lucia? Still nothing. Vinny approached, his face concerned. Maybe she left? No. She's scared. Dom remembered the trembling in her hands, the way she'd flinched when he'd raised his voice to Santiago. She thinks she did something wrong. How could she think? Because that's what happens when you're invisible for too long. You start believing you don't matter. Dom's jaw tightened. Brick, get me a ladder. I'm going up. The climb was awkward in his leather and boots, but Dom managed. The vent shaft was even tighter than he remembered, and he had to army crawl through darkness guided only by his phone's flashlight. He found her in a corner junction of ducts, curled into a ball with tripod pressed against her side. The dog growled softly until recognizing Dom's scent. Hey, Dom said softly. You okay? Raven didn't look up. Did I do bad? Bad? Kid, you saved 50 lives tonight. But I broke my promise. I said I'd never tell anyone about the vents. That this was my secret place. And now, her voice broke. Now everyone knows. Dom felt something crack in his chest. This child, this impossibly brave, impossibly alone child, was more worried about losing her hiding spot than about the gunfight that had just happened below. Lucia, he said, using her real name deliberately. Look at me. Slowly, reluctantly, she raised her head. You didn't break any promises. You did what heroes do. You saw people in danger, and you warned them. That's not breaking a promise. He struggled for the right words. That's being stronger than you needed to be. I don't feel strong. I feel scared. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared and you do the right thing anyway. Dom shifted position, settling cross-legged in the cramped space. You know what I think? What? I think you've been alone too long. I think you've been hiding in these walls, invisible and forgotten, surviving instead of living. He pulled off his leather vest, the most sacred item a biker owned, second only to his bike itself. The Iron Monarch's patch gleamed on the back, the emblem of his authority. He draped it over her thin shoulders. Raven's eyes went wide. I can't. This is yours. It was mine. Now it's ours. Dom's voice was gentle but firm. You're not invisible anymore, Lucia. You're not alone. You're family. But I'm not a biker. No, you're better. You're the girl who saved the Iron Monarchs. Do you know what that makes you? He smiled. It makes you the most important person in this club. Tears streaked down her dirty face. I don't understand. Come with me. I'll show you. Dom emerged from the vent carrying Raven, the girl wrapped in his vest like a royal cloak. Tripod followed, hopping along on his 3 legs with surprising dignity. The warehouse floor had transformed. The Vipers and Monarchs, former enemies, now uneasy allies, stood in loose formation. When Dom appeared carrying the child, every conversation stopped. Silence fell like a physical weight. Dom walked to the center of the space, to the conference table that was supposed to be a death trap. He set Raven down on the table itself, where everyone could see her. "Gentlemen," Dom announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the warehouse. "This is Lucia. Street name, Raven. Some of you might recognize her, the homeless kid who lives in the alleys." Uncomfortable shifts. Nobody wanted to acknowledge the invisible people in their city. 3 years ago, Dom continued, she watched her mother fail to come home. For 3 years, this child survived alone in the skeleton of our city. She lived in vents, ate from dumpsters, and watched our world from the shadows. He placed his hand on Raven's shoulder. Tonight, she could have stayed silent. She could have stayed invisible. Instead, when she overheard a plot to massacre the Iron Monarchs, she made the bravest choice possible. She spoke. For the first time in 3 years, she found her voice. And she used it to save our lives. Dom turned to address his brothers directly. "Every man wearing this patch is alive right now because a child who owed us nothing decided to warn us. Every officer in this club has a future, has a chance to see tomorrow, because this girl, this tiny, terrified, brave girl, valued our lives more than her own safety." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his president patch, the one that marked him as the highest authority in the Iron Monarchs. It was the patch his predecessor had given him 5 years ago, the symbol of leadership that commanded respect from every brother. Dom knelt, bringing himself eye level with Raven. In the military, when someone saves your life, you owe them a debt you can never repay. But you can honor them, respect them, protect them. He held up the patch. "Lucia, I can't make you a biker. You're 11 years old, and you weigh maybe 80 pounds. But I can make you family." He pinned the patch to the vest she wore, his vest, now hers. "From this day forward, you are under the protection of the Iron Monarchs. Any man who threatens you, threatens us. Any man who hurts you, answers to 50 bikers with long memories." His voice rose, addressing the entire assembly. "This girl is family. She is honor. She is the reason we're still breathing. And anyone, brother, rival, or stranger, who doesn't treat her with respect will deal with me personally." The warehouse erupted. It started with Vinny, who began a slow clap that built into thunder. Then Brick joined, then Carlos, then every monarch in the building. Even the Vipers, seeing the power of the moment, added their voices to the ovation. Raven stood on the table, wrapped in leather and authority, looking stunned. "What do I say?" she whispered to Dom. "Whatever you want, kid. They're listening." She took a breath, looked out at the sea of leather and steel, and spoke in a voice that was still small, but carried surprising strength. "Thank you for believing me." 5 words, but they were enough. The cleanup took hours. Captain Hayes was delivered to the FBI with a complete confession and the video evidence. The Bureau had been investigating police corruption for months. Hayes's testimony and Raven's footage were the breakthrough they needed. Within a week, 12 more officers would be arrested. Santiago survived his wounds but faced decades in federal prison for attempted mass murder, weapons trafficking, and conspiracy. The Vipers, leaderless and broken, dissolved as an organization. Some members joined the Monarchs. Others left the city entirely. The Iron Monarchs became the undisputed power in the territory, but Dom ran the club differently than his predecessors. No more civilian casualties. No more reckless violence. They controlled the protection contracts, the dock access, the underground economy, but they did it with a code of honor that bordered on old-fashioned. And at the center of it all was Raven. Dom had her moved out of the vents that same night, installing her in the clubhouse's upstairs apartment, a space normally reserved for visiting chapters or brothers in crisis. Vinny's wife, Maria, volunteered to help with the girl things that terrified every biker in the club. But it was the brothers themselves who truly adopted her. Brick taught her to change motorcycle oil, his massive hands guiding her tiny ones through the mechanical mysteries of a Harley engine. Carlos, who'd been a teacher before joining the club, helped her study, determined to get her enrolled in school despite her lack of official documentation. Vinny, the hot-headed VP, revealed an unexpected talent for braiding hair, learned during his own daughter's childhood. And Dom became something he'd never expected to be. A father. 3 months later. No. You're gripping too tight. The Glock isn't going to run away. Dom stood behind Raven at the makeshift firing range behind the clubhouse. She held the unloaded pistol with the intense concentration of a child trying to prove herself. But what if I drop it? Then you pick it up. Weapons are tools, Raven. You respect them, but you don't fear them. He adjusted her stance, correcting her foot position. Now let's talk about sight alignment again. Press. Vinny called from the clubhouse door. School called. There's a situation. Dom and Raven exchanged glances. What kind of situation? Dom asked warily. The kind where 3 8th-grade boys are in the nurse's office with black eyes, and our girl is in the principal's office. 10 minutes later, Dom sat in Principal Morrison's office, Raven beside him looking defiant despite the split knuckle on her right hand. Mr. Kane. Principal Morrison began carefully. Everyone in the neighborhood knew who Dom was. Lucia was involved in an altercation today. Let me guess. Those boys were bothering someone. Morrison blinked. How did you? Because I know her. She doesn't start fights. She finishes them. Dom turned to Raven. What happened? They were hurting Jessica, Raven said quietly. The girl from Honduras. They kept pulling her hair and calling her names. I told them to stop. And when they didn't, I made them stop. Principal Morrison cleared his throat. Mr. Kane, I understand Lucia has had a difficult upbringing. But violence is not acceptable in this school. You're right. It's not. Dom's voice was mild, but his eyes were hard. So what are you going to do about the 3 boys who were assaulting another student? We're addressing. Because here's how I see it. My daughter, the word still felt new but right, saw someone being hurt and intervened. Did she use too much force? Maybe. But where were the teachers? Where was the supervision? Why did an 11-year-old girl have to be the one to stop a bullying incident? Morrison shifted uncomfortably. I'll talk to her about proportional response, Dom continued. But I'm not going to punish her for protecting someone weaker. That's not how we operate. We, the Iron Monarchs. Family. Dom stood, signaling the meeting was over. Come on, Raven. Let's go home. Outside, Raven looked up at him with worried eyes. Am I in trouble? With me? No. But we do need to talk about better ways to handle bullies. He ruffled her hair, a gesture that had become automatic. Also, Brick is going to want to know how you landed those hits. He'll probably give you pointers. Really? Kid, you knocked out 3 boys who each outweighed you by 40 pounds. That's actually pretty impressive. Dom couldn't quite hide his pride. But next time, maybe try words first? I did try words. They didn't listen. Then you escalate to threats. Then you get a teacher. Then, he sighed. Okay, fine. Sometimes you have to throw punches. But at least try the other steps first. Raven nodded seriously. I'll try. Good enough. 5 years later, the Iron Monarch's clubhouse had been transformed. Where once it had been a purely masculine space, all beer signs and motorcycle parts, it now showed signs of Raven's influence. Bookshelves lined one wall. A corner had been converted into a study area. The old pool table remained, but a small garden had been planted out back. It was Raven's 16th birthday, and the clubhouse was packed. Brothers from 3 states had come to celebrate. Raven, taller now, more confident, but still slight and dark-haired, moved through the crowd with comfortable familiarity. She wore a leather jacket custom-made by the club's leather worker, with her own patch. Little Queen of the Iron Monarchs. It wasn't a joke. She genuinely commanded respect. Dom watched from the bar as she laughed with Carlos, now the club's official education officer. Raven had not only finished high school early, but had been accepted to college with a full scholarship. She planned to study social work, with a focus on homeless youth. Hard to believe it's been 5 years, Vinny commented, appearing at Dom's elbow with 2 beers. Feels like yesterday. Feels like forever. Dom accepted the bottle. Remember when you thought she was bait? Part of Santiago's trap. In my defense, I'm paranoid for good reasons. Vinny grinned. But yeah, I was wrong. Best mistake I ever made was listening to you instead of my instincts. She saved us all. And we saved her. That's what family does. The party continued into the night. Someone produced a guitar. Stories were told. Some true, some exaggerated, all entertaining. Tripod, now an ancient dog by any standard, slept peacefully in his custom bed near the fireplace. At midnight, Dom called for silence. Brothers, guests, family. He began, using the traditional opening. We're here tonight to celebrate someone special. Someone who changed the history of this club. He gestured to Raven, who approached with her usual mix of confidence and shy uncertainty. 16 years ago today, Lucia was born. 11 years ago, she lost her mother. 5 years ago, she saved 50 lives with 3 words. They are waiting for you. The crowd rumbled with approval. But this isn't a party about the past. It's about the future. Because in 3 months, our little queen heads off to college. She's going to help kids like she was, invisible, alone, forgotten. She's going to make the world better. Dom pulled an envelope from his jacket. The club voted. We want to do something to mark this occasion. Something that shows you're not just protected by the Iron Monarchs, you're one of us. He handed her the envelope. Raven opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single document. Legal adoption papers, signed by every officer in the club. At the bottom, in the space for father, was Dominic Kane's signature. I know it's just a formality, Dom said softly, his voice thick with emotion. You've been my daughter for 5 years already. But I wanted it to be official, legal, permanent. Raven's eyes filled with tears. You're adopting me? If you'll have me. She threw herself into his arms, and the clubhouse erupted in cheers. Later, after the celebrations had died down and most of the guests had departed, Raven found Dom on the porch, looking out at the city lights. Thank you, she said quietly. For the adoption? Kid, I should be thanking you. No, for everything. For believing me that night. For teaching me I mattered. She struggled for words. For being my dad. Dom pulled her into a side hug. You know what's crazy? I spent 10 years fighting to keep this club alive. 10 years of war, violence, constant struggle. And I thought that was strength. That was what being a leader meant. What changed? You did. You showed me that real strength isn't about winning fights. It's about protecting the people who can't protect themselves. It's about using power to lift people up instead of putting them down. He looked at her with genuine pride. You made the Iron Monarchs better. You made me better. I was just scared that night. I didn't want you to die. And that fear, that care for others, made you braver than any of us. Dom smiled. The club history books will record this era as the Age of the Raven. Not because you rode motorcycles or won fights, but because you reminded us what honor really means. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city they'd helped reshape. A city where the Iron Monarchs were feared and respected, yes, but also trusted. Where street kids knew there was a place they could go for help. Where the homeless found protection instead of persecution. All because one girl had been brave enough to speak. Dad, Raven said, the words still new enough to make Dom's heart skip. Yeah. I'm glad you stopped to help Tripod that day. 3 years ago. Dom laughed. Me too, kid. Me too. In the distance, the city hummed with nightlife. Clubs, cars, the eternal rhythm of urban existence. But here, on the clubhouse porch, surrounded by the family she'd saved and the family that had saved her in return, Raven felt something she'd never expected to feel again. Home. 10 years later. The thesis defense was held in the university's largest auditorium, packed with professors, students, and, in the back rows, an unusual audience of leather-clad bikers who sat with surprising stillness and attention. Dr. Lucia Raven Kane stood at the podium, presenting her doctoral research on intervention strategies for homeless youth. Her findings, drawn from a decade of fieldwork with the Iron Monarchs outreach program, would revolutionize how cities approached street homelessness. In the front row, Dominic Kane watched his daughter with undisguised pride. Gray touched his temples now, and old injuries made him favor his left leg, but his eyes were clear and sharp. When Raven finished her presentation, the committee chair smiled. Dr. Kane, your research is remarkable, but I have to ask, why this topic? What drove you to dedicate your career to homeless youth? Raven looked past the professors, past the students, to the back row where 50 bikers sat watching. Men who'd become her family. Men who'd taught her that family wasn't about blood, it was about showing up when it mattered. Because I was homeless once, she said simply, and someone showed up for me. I want to make sure someone shows up for every kid who's invisible, every child who thinks they don't matter. She touched the small motorcycle pin on her lapel, a gift from the club when she'd graduated high school. I want to teach the world what a biker once taught me. That strength means protecting the weak. That honor means keeping your word. And that family means never letting someone face darkness alone. The committee awarded her degree with highest honors. But the real celebration happened that night at the clubhouse, where Dr. Lucia Kane, street name Raven, daughter of Dom, little queen of the Iron Monarchs, danced with her father while 50 bikers cheered and her three-legged dog watched from his bed. History would record her as an academic, an advocate, a revolutionary thinker in homeless intervention. But the Iron Monarchs knew the truth. She was the girl who'd whispered a warning in the darkness and changed everything. She was family, and she always would be.